Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions meet elegance and love writes its own destiny. Was a man carved from ice and discipline. Alexander Knight, the billionaire whose name alone could silence a boardroom and shake entire markets. His empire stretched across continents, yet his world was empty. No warmth, no laughter, no love. Every smile he gave was calculated, every move rehearsed. Behind his cold gray eyes lay storms, memories he had buried, and a love he thought he could never feel again. Then came Elena Rivera, the woman who didn't bow to his power or fear his silence. She entered his life not through wealth or privilege, but through courage. A journalist chasing a story about his mysterious past. What began as confrontation turned into fascination. She saw the man behind the armor, the boy who once loved deeply and lost painfully. Elena was light, unpredictable, untamed, and heartbreakingly honest. And Alexander, he was the darkness that both feared and needed her. Every meeting between them was fire and frost colliding. He pushed her away to protect her, yet every word, every look, pulled her closer. The more Elena uncovered his secrets, the more she realized his coldness wasn't cruelty, it was grief. Years ago, Alexander had lost someone he loved more than life itself, and since then, he had vowed never to love again. But destiny had other plans. In Elena's presence his heart began to thaw. His voice softened, his gaze warmed. But love, when buried too long, returns with a vengeance, and Alexander soon learned that to love her meant to risk everything. Enemies from his empire saw her as his weakness. His past rose like ghosts demanding repayment, and when the world tried to tear them apart, Alexander made one final promise. If the world stands between us, then the world will burn. Because behind his cold eyes was a love fierce enough to destroy everything and rebuild it for her. The world called him Alexander Knight, the architect of empires, the man whose signature could move mountains and whose silence could freeze an entire room. He was power personified. The kind of man who walked through life with a calm that made others tremble, wearing control like a second skin. Every gesture he made was deliberate, elegant, precise, a performance of authority that never faltered. But beneath that perfectly tailored black suit and unshakable demeanor, there was something no one saw, a storm frozen behind his gray eyes. Those eyes, cold, haunting, unreadable. They were the eyes of a man who had once felt everything too deeply, and now felt nothing at all. Alexander's mansion sat on the edge of the city, a glass fortress overlooking a sea of lights. The world called it magnificent, he called it empty. Every polished marble floor, every crystal chandelier, every silent hallway was a monument to loneliness. He moved through it like a ghost, untouched by the world that worshipped him. His life was a symphony of precision. He woke before dawn, exercised with military discipline, and reviewed markets before the city even stirred. Breakfast was not a meal, it was a ritual. Black coffee, no sugar. Newspapers arranged in order of global importance, and silence. Always silence. His staff respected him, but feared him more. None dared speak unless spoken to. None dared look too long into those eyes that saw everything yet revealed nothing. He had mastered the art of emotional invisibility. No scandal, no affair, no friendship. His heart was as guarded as his fortune. Yet sometimes in the quiet moments, between midnight and morning, when even the city outside seemed to hold its breath, Alexander would pause by the massive window of his study. The world below glittered with 1,000 lights, beautiful, distant, unreachable. And he'd whisper to himself words he once said to someone long ago. One day, I'll build a world where nothing can be taken from me again. That promise had built his empire. But it had also buried his soul. Years ago, love had burned him, not in the way of fleeting heartbreaks, but in a way that carved itself into his bones. He had loved a woman who brought light into his world, and lost her in the cruelest way. Since then, he had built walls higher than skyscrapers, walls no one dared to climb. He was ice because warmth had once destroyed him. The press painted him as the untouchable billionaire, a genius, a mystery. Some said he had no heart at all, and perhaps they were right. But fate, as it often does, was already weaving another thread into his life, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew. That night, as rain tapped softly against the glass and thunder rolled in the distance, Alexander stood alone in his vast living room, staring at the flames flickering in his fireplace. The firelight danced across his face, illuminating the sharp lines of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the faint ache he never spoke of. His phone buzzed, a notification, a headline. Journalist Elena Rivera questions the ethics behind Knight Enterprises' expansion. He read it slowly twice. Her name lingered, Elena Rivera. A woman with fire in her words, a stranger. And yet something in him stirred, something he couldn't name. He didn't know her, but her boldness intrigued him. It had been years since anyone dared to challenge him so directly. He smiled, not a real smile, but the ghost of one, and whispered, almost to himself, "You're either brave or foolish, Miss Rivera." Outside, lightning lit the sky. Inside, the man of ice felt the faintest spark. Because even the coldest hearts know the sound of destiny approaching, quiet, certain, unstoppable. That night, as Alexander descended the marble staircase to his private library, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the mansion. The world saw a billionaire without weakness, but in that echo lay the truth. It was the sound of a man walking through the ruins of his own soul. And somewhere in the city, a woman named Elena Rivera was typing his name into her computer, unaware that her next story would ignite the beginning of a fire neither of them could control. The city never slept, but Elena Rivera did not belong to its chaos. She danced through it. Where others saw skyscrapers and steel, she saw stories waiting to be told. Where others feared names like Alexander Knight, she saw only a man hiding behind a fortress of gold and grief. She was a journalist, sharp, bold, and beautifully relentless. Her words were her rebellion, her truth her weapon. Yet beneath her fearless ambition lived a heart that had been broken too, not by loss, but by disappointment. The world had taught her that honesty was dangerous, that power was poison, and that love, the kind that consumes you, was a myth best left unwritten. But destiny loves irony, and fate, in all its quiet mischief, was about to lead her straight into the arms of the man she had sworn to expose. The day she first entered Night Tower, she felt its chill, a coldness that wasn't just from the glass and steel, but from the man who ruled it. Alexander's world was immaculate. Every surface gleamed, every assistant moved with rehearsed perfection. The air smelled of wealth, subtle, expensive, untouchable. "Miss Rivera," his secretary said, leading her toward the executive floor. "Mr. Knight agreed to 10 minutes of your time. No cameras, no recording devices, 10 minutes. That was all she needed, or so she thought." When the doors opened she saw him, the man the media called the billionaire of ice. Alexander Knight sat behind a black marble desk, the city sprawling behind him like a kingdom under his command. His posture was effortless, his expression unreadable. He looked up, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, something shifted, something neither could name. Her pen trembled slightly, his gaze lingered a fraction too long. "Miss Rivera," he greeted, his voice smooth as silk yet sharp as glass. "You have questions. Ask them." She did. Every word was measured, direct, her tone carried no fear, only truth. And Alexander, used to people bending, flattering, worshipping, found himself listening. She challenged him, not out of arrogance but principle. When she accused him of emotional detachment from his empire's human cost, he didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her, not as an opponent, but as if he were trying to remember something long forgotten. "Do you always speak to billionaires this way?" he finally asked, leaning back. "Only the ones who think they're gods," she answered softly. He almost smiled. That conversation, that duel of words and wills, was supposed to be professional, but something about her stirred the silence inside him. She wasn't impressed by his power, nor intimidated by his presence. She didn't see the billionaire, she saw the man behind the glass. When Elena left that room, her heart was unsteady. She told herself it was adrenaline, not attraction, but deep down she knew, she had seen something in those cold eyes. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but loneliness. And loneliness had a language she understood too well. The days that followed were filled with questions she couldn't stop asking. About him, his past, his walls. Every story she uncovered led not to scandal, but to sorrow. A mother lost too young, a lover whose death was never spoken of. A man who built empires not for greed, but to escape grief. The deeper she went, the more her objectivity crumbled. And then came the night she saw him again, not in an office, but at a charity gala. He was surrounded by elegance. Crystal chandeliers, champagne, violins, yet he stood apart, distant, detached. The crowd admired him, she watched him, and when their eyes met across the room, the world fell away. He walked toward her slowly, every step deliberate, his gaze locked on hers. "Elena Rivera," he said softly, the music fading in her mind. "You look like trouble." She smiled. "You look like you need some." It wasn't flirting. It was a spark. Dangerous, undeniable. Fated. He shouldn't have touched her hand. she shouldn't have let him. But when his fingers brushed hers, the temperature between them changed. The air thickened. The room disappeared. And for the first time in years, Alexander Knight felt alive. After that night, he tried to stay away. He buried himself in meetings, flew across continents, drowned himself in power. But her voice, that fierce, fearless honesty, followed him like a melody he couldn't silence. She saw him. Not the empire, not the money, not the mask. Him. And that terrified him more than anything. Because if she could see through his walls, she could break them. In her small apartment that overlooked the rain-drenched streets, Elena reread the notes she had taken from their meeting. But instead of facts, she found feelings. Instead of exposure, she found empathy. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered to herself, "What are you doing, Elena?" He's the story, not the dream. Yet somewhere deep inside, she already knew. Some stories aren't meant to be written. They're meant to be lived. Night had fallen softly over the city, painting Alexander Knight's penthouse in shades of silver and silence. The lights of the skyline shimmered like distant memories, beautiful, unreachable, eternal. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey that caught the faint glow of the moon. But he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing her. A ghost from another lifetime. A woman with laughter like spring rain and eyes that had once made him believe in forever. Her name was Isabelle Laurent. Years ago, when Alexander was still a man of dreams rather than empires, Isabelle had been his anchor. She was warmth to his ambition, poetry to his precision. Together they had imagined a world beyond wealth, a life filled with art, travel, and the quiet joy of simply being understood. But life, cruel and clever, had taken her too soon. A car accident, a moment, a heartbeat, and she was gone. That night had shattered something inside him, leaving behind a hollow version of the man she had loved. Since then Alexander had built his empire not for glory, but for escape. He turned pain into power, love into logic. Every business deal, every ruthless decision was armor. A way to silence the ache that whispered her name in the dark. He had promised himself he would never love again. Because love, to him, was a liability, something that could be taken. Until Elena Rivera walked into his life. She had Isabelle's courage, but not her gentleness. Elena was fire where Isabelle had been calm, fierce, unpredictable, alive. And that terrified him more than he would ever admit. He had felt it the moment their hands brushed. A spark that woke something long dormant inside him, a part of him he had buried 6 feet deep under work, control, and grief. But with every encounter, that buried part began to rise. Her laughter echoed in his office long after she left. Her scent lingered on his mind like a melody he couldn't unhear. And yet, with every heartbeat that drew him closer to her, guilt whispered in his ear, "You have no right to feel this again." One evening, unable to escape his thoughts, he drove to the edge of the city, to the old chapel where Isabelle had been buried. Rain fell like soft tears against the stone path as he stood before her grave. A man who had conquered the world but lost the one soul who made it worth it. He knelt, his voice breaking the night stillness. "I don't know what I'm doing, Isabelle. She's different. She's not you. But when she looks at me, I can't breathe." The wind moved through the trees as if listening. For the first time in years, Alexander's mask cracked, and the man behind the billionaire, the broken, bleeding, grieving man, emerged. When he returned home, drenched and exhausted, Elena was waiting for him. She had come uninvited, following an instinct she couldn't explain. Seeing him standing there, soaked and silent, something inside her shifted. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Her voice, it wasn't pity, it was care, the kind of care that melts walls. He looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, "You shouldn't be here." "Then tell me to leave," she challenged gently. But he didn't. He couldn't. That night, the silence between them was alive, heavy with everything they weren't saying. She moved closer, her presence warm, grounding. For a moment, she reached out and brushed her fingers across his hand. A touch so simple, yet it sent tremors through him. Her eyes met his. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said. He wanted to believe her. God, he did. But behind his cold eyes lived memories too cruel to share. Nights filled with screams, with loss, with promises broken by fate. So instead of speaking, he turned away. "Some things," he said quietly, "are better left buried." Elena studied him, sadness softening her features. "Maybe," she whispered. "But buried things have a way of growing roots." Her words struck him harder than she knew. Over the next weeks, Alexander tried to stay distant, but the universe conspired against him. Business meetings, charity galas, unexpected encounters. Elena was everywhere. And with each meeting his control faltered. He began to feel again, not just attraction but connection, warmth, life. But the past was never far behind. A photograph surfaced in the media. Isabel and Alexander, hand in hand, the headline readings, "The love that changed the coldest billionaire." Elena saw it. The woman in the picture was ethereal, graceful, elegant, everything Elena was not. And for the first time, she understood the depth of his silence. When she confronted him, her voice trembled. "As she the reason you shut the world out?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her, those cold eyes suddenly filled with centuries of pain. "I lost her," he said finally, his voice breaking. "And when she died, I did too." Oh, tears filled Elena's eyes. "Then maybe it's time you came back to life." That night, something shifted. The past had not disappeared, it had simply transformed. Isabel would always be part of him. But Elena, she was the fire that could bring him back from the ashes. For the first time in years, Alexander let someone in. Not because he had forgotten his past, but because she made him believe there could still be a future. It began with a glance. The kind that lingers longer than it should. It deepened with silence. The kind that says everything words cannot. And before they realized it, Alexander Knight and Elena Rivera were already standing on the edge of something neither of them could escape. The world saw him as untouchable. A man made of ice, too powerful to feel, too proud to bend. But when Elena entered his world, the air around him began to change. She brought color where there had only been grays. She brought laughter into the spaces that echoed with loneliness. And without permission, without warning, she began to thaw the man the world called the billionaire of ice. He tried to fight it. God knows he tried. He avoided her calls, canceled meetings, buried himself in work. Anything to silence the voice inside that whispered her name every time the night fell. But love doesn't ask for consent. It arrives, uninvited, unstoppable, and all-consuming. One evening, fate cornered them again. Elena had been sent to his mansion to cover an exclusive charity event. Cameras flashed, champagne sparkled, and music swirled through the golden halls of marble and luxury. She moved gracefully through the crowd, wearing a black gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her hair cascading in soft waves over bare shoulders. She looked like a secret wrapped in elegance. And then he saw her. Across the room, Alexander stood in a tailored midnight suit, his tie loosened just enough to betray the perfection he always carried. For the first time that night, the mask slipped. Their eyes met, hers full of unspoken defiance, his full of hunger and hesitation. The crowd faded, the world blurred. Only the two of them remained. He crossed the distance between them slowly, his presence commanding yet magnetic. "Miss Rivera," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You do realize you're becoming impossible to avoid." Elena tilted her head, a teasing smile tugging at her lips, then stopped trying. A dangerous silence fell between them, electric, heavy, intoxicating. He wanted to say something sharp, to reassert the control she kept undoing with a single glance. But instead, he reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. That touch, soft, deliberate, felt like fire meeting ice. She inhaled sharply. "People are watching," she whispered. "Let them," he said simply, his gaze never leaving hers. Later that night, long after the gala ended, Elena found herself outside on the terrace overlooking the city lights. The cold wind danced against her skin, but inside she burned. She heard footsteps behind her, steady, familiar. Alexander joined her, his voice quiet. "You shouldn't be here alone." "Neither should you," she said, turning to face him. The moonlight painted his face in silver. He looked almost human then. Not the billionaire, not the legend, just a man standing too close to temptation. "Elena," he began, his voice trembling in a way it never had before. "This, whatever this is, it can't happen." "Why not?" "Because I can't lose again." The words hung between them, raw, real, painful. She looked at him, her heart breaking for the man who built empires to hide his wounds. "Maybe," she said softly. "You've already lost yourself trying not to feel." Something in him shattered. And in that moment, he stopped thinking. He closed the distance between them, his hand finding her waist, pulling her close. The world disappeared. Their lips met, not with haste, but with hunger long restrained. It was a kiss that tasted like confession, like forgiveness, like two storms colliding. Her fingers tangled in his hair, His hand trembled against her spine. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate. The kind of kiss that burns because it's forbidden, because it carries the weight of everything that could go wrong, and yet feels like the only thing that's right. When they finally pulled apart, breathing unevenly, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "This shouldn't have happened," he whispered, though his voice betrayed no regret. "Then why does it feel like it was always meant to?" He closed his eyes, torn between reason and longing. "Elena, you don't understand the danger." She smiled faintly. "Then show me." Days turned into weeks, and what began as stolen moments became a secret symphony of desire. Behind closed doors, the world's coldest man learned warmth again. He laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years. He watched the sunrise with her curled against his chest, the city still sleeping below. He touched her as if memorizing a dream he feared would vanish with morning light. But with every kiss, every whisper, came the ache of inevitability. They were fire and frost, beautiful, but unsustainable. His empire had enemies, her career had eyes. Their love was a secret that could destroy them both, and yet, neither could stop. One night, as rain fell against his mansion's glass walls, Alexander whispered against her skin, "You make me want to believe in forever again." She smiled through tears, her voice trembling. "Then believe, Alexander, even if it's only for tonight." He kissed her again, fiercely, tenderly, completely, because he knew, if the world demanded a price for loving her, he would pay it. No empire, no fortune, no reputation was worth more than the woman who made him feel human again. For a while, their love existed in stolen hours and whispered promises, a world of their own hidden behind glass walls and midnight skies. But love, especially the kind that burns too brightly, never stays secret for long. The world began to notice. The man who was once untouchable, Alexander Knight, the ruthless billionaire who bowed to nothing, was suddenly distracted, vulnerable, human. And in the empire of power and greed, humanity was weakness, love was war. It started with a rumor, a leaked photo, Alexander's hand brushing Elena's at a gala, their eyes locked in a gaze that spoke volumes. Then came headlines, scandals, speculation. The billionaire and the journalist. Passion or manipulation. Knight's empire at risk, the woman behind his fall. The world that once worshipped him now turned its knives. Investors questioned his judgment. Board members whispered betrayal. And his enemies, those who had waited years to see him fall, finally saw their opening. Inside Knight Tower, the air grew colder. The board demanded explanations. The press circled like vultures. And Elena, though brave, began to feel the weight of the world pressing down on her heart. "Alexander, this is destroying you," she said one evening, standing in his office as rain streaked the windows. "They're calling you reckless. They're calling me." Her voice broke. "They're calling me your mistake." He turned toward her, his jaw tight, eyes burning with restrained fury. "You are not my mistake," he said, every word carved in steel. "You're the only thing in my life that ever felt real." "Then why does it hurt like this?" she whispered. He closed the distance between them, his hand finding hers, his voice rough with emotion. "Because the world doesn't understand love that doesn't follow its rules." In the days that followed, Alexander tried to protect her, quietly, fiercely. He used his power to silence the rumors, his money to bury the stories, his influence to erase her name from scandal. But in doing so, he only made her feel smaller, hidden, erased. "I don't want to be your secret," she said one night, her voice trembling between anger and heartbreak. "I want to be your truth." He looked at her, really looked, and realized that he was losing her not to the world but to his own fear. "Elena," he said softly, "if I tell the world what you mean to me, they will come for you. They will ruin you just to reach me." "Then let them," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Because what's the point of love if it hides in the dark?" But the storm had already begun. One morning, she woke to a nightmare. Her career destroyed by lies, her editor suspended her for bias, her reputation shattered by whispers of corruption and manipulation. And Alexander, he was blamed for everything. For the first time, they stood on opposite sides of the same fire. He tried to fix it with power, she wanted to fight it with truth. And somewhere between protection and pride, they began to break. One night, after days of silence, Alexander arrived at her apartment. He looked exhausted, his usual composure fractured, his tie loosened, his eyes filled with something between anger and desperation. "Elena, please," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Don't walk away." She stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, her tears reflecting the city lights. "You built a world that can destroy anything it touches," she said quietly. "And now it's destroying us." He stepped closer, his heart in his throat. "I built it to protect myself, but I never realized it would be the cage that keeps me from you." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of rain filled the space between them. Then he reached out, his hand trembling. "Tell me how to fix this, Elena." She looked at him, her voice soft but sure. "You can't fix it, Alexander. You can only choose." That night, something inside him shifted. The next morning, the world woke to a story that broke the internet. Alexander Knight declares his love for Elena Rivera and steps down from his own company. He had given up the empire he built for the woman who made him feel alive. And when reporters surrounded him, asking if he regretted it, he said only one thing: "You don't regret breathing, and she is the reason I started breathing again." Days later he appeared at her door. No suit, no entourage, no mask, just a man stripped of everything but truth. She looked at him, her heart racing. "You did it," she whispered. "I did," he said softly. "And I'd do it again." "Why?" He took her hands, his eyes warm and alive for the first time in years. "Because behind my cold eyes, Elena, there was always a fire. You didn't light it. You found it. And I'd burn the world 1,000 times to keep it alive." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she leaned into him, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Then don't burn the world, Alexander, just hold me." And in that moment, in the quiet glow of morning light, he did. No empire, no fortune, no headlines, just love, pure, fierce, eternal. In the end, love didn't win through wealth, nor by power. It won through surrender. Alexander Knight, the man who once commanded boardrooms, controlled markets, and shaped empires, found himself undone not by enemies or rivals, but by the soft strength of one woman's heart. He had everything this world could offer, except peace. And when Elena walked into his life, she didn't just bring beauty, she brought truth, a truth that stripped away the glitter, the control, the perfection. Until all that remained was a man, raw and real, standing in the ruins of his own pride. When he let go of his empire, he didn't lose, he found. He found a freedom that money could never buy, a calm that boardrooms could never give, a warmth that glass towers could never hold. Because in her eyes, he saw not what he was, but what he could be. And in his love, she saw not the billionaire the world feared, but the broken soul she could heal. Together, they built something the world could never touch, a bond that lived beyond headlines, beyond status, beyond time. They walked away from a world obsessed with appearances, and built one where love breathed without fear. No contracts, no conditions, no control, just the quiet, eternal promise of two hearts that had survived the storm. Elena once said, "What's the point of love if it hides in the dark?" And Alexander proved her right. He stepped into the light, not as the man the world demanded, but as the man love had created. In the soft silence of a new dawn, they stood together on the balcony of a modest seaside home. The empire replaced by simplicity, the noise replaced by peace. Elena leaned against him, her head resting on his chest, and whispered, "Was it worth it?" He smiled, a real smile, unguarded and free, and said, "Every empire falls, Elena. But ours will last forever." In a world ruled by power, he chose love. In a life built on control, he found surrender. And in her arms, the man who had everything finally had enough. This was their story. A tale of love that burned brighter than wealth, softer than power, and truer than destiny itself.